Brilliant. Okay, so welcome back. For this last part of the day, so I mentioned earlier that this event is brought to you by the Royal Society of Arts and the Universal Basic Income Lab Network. This next part of the day is our chance to find out more the sort of nitty-gritty of what the UBI Lab Network is all about. And we're going to be hearing that from the co-founder of the UBI Lab Network, Jonny Douglas. So how this will work is you'll have about 10 minutes to give a bit of an introduction, overview, is that all right? And then we're going to have some questions from me on the floor. Is that all right?
Yep, that's absolutely fine.
Can I give you a microphone? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Super. Thank you.
Coming through okay? Sweet. So I'm not actually going to talk about the UBI Lab Network for my 10 minutes. I'll do that in the questions. What I'm going to endeavour to do is talk about some of the things that have been talked about today, but in a bit of a different way. Because my intention with this next 10 minutes is to infect you with an idea. A bold choice of words, I understand, considering our current situation. But the idea I want to infect you with is not necessarily what you might guess it to be. So there's been a lot of ideas today that have been suggested that I think are really important. And you've heard lots of bits of facts, of information and data and all sorts of things that you're about to look away and scan QR codes and find out more about so you can present it as evidence. The evidence only needs to be there to back it up, because if we have enough of the right idea and enough of the right focus, then we can achieve the things that we want to achieve. So I want to take you on a little bit of a journey through some things that lead us to this idea. And one of the things that I think that we've all realized for a while now, and it takes time to realize these things, but I think that realization has been accelerated significantly by the pandemic. And it's a journey about myths, and the myths that we tell ourselves, even when we don't consciously think that we're thinking those things or telling ourselves those things. And they're everywhere. They're all around us, even now in this very room. They're there when you put your screens on and you sit down in front of Netflix. They're there when you go to work, whether you do that remotely or in person. They're there when you pay your taxes. They are absolutely a part of everything that we do. And they're the myths that we're pulling over our own eyes to blind ourselves from the truths. And that's a bit of a problem. Because we believe all sorts of myths like laziness and apathy, as have been talked about today. We don't think them intentionally, but we catch ourselves sometimes projecting them onto people because they exist all around us. And if we're true to ourselves, we do kind of do that. We don't tend to do it, but it's an unconscious thought that has been taught and built into us. It's like the classic initial response to the idea that you give people a chance in life by giving them some sort of stable economic base from which they could build. And we say, well, they'll sit on their arse at home and they'll do nothing, and they'll buy cigarettes and alcohol and other things. So that's not what loads of people do. We all have our vices. But if you actually ask someone whether they do that, their response is, oh, no, not me, other people. And that's the unintentional, unconscious projection of something you not consciously chose to hold as a belief. You go, no, you mean other people. Well, who? Which other people are we talking about? Are we talking about the mythical people that exist on the pages of the Daily Mail? Are we talking about those people? Or are we talking about real people? Because if you ask people, well, who do you mean? They don't really have an answer. It's not the people they know, it's other people. And it's not the people that they know, it's other people. Which quickly gets you down to the realization that it's just a myth. That's the truth. There is no laziness. The idea that people derive only a paycheck from the work that they do is ludicrous. And quite a cynical way of looking at the world that any politician that opened their mouths to any effect of that should be absolutely ashamed of. And we've tested it and we've proved it. Baron von Sunak did a very, very useful test that bankrupted the myth about 2 years ago now, with 9 million people in this country. They were given money to stabilise their economic position? Did they sit at home on the sofa? Yeah, for a few days, maybe a week tops. And then they started going stir crazy because they didn't have anything to do. It's one of the fortuitous things that, although we wouldn't have wished the circumstances, benefit the UBI Lab Network no end. We quadrupled in size during the pandemic. But it debunked the myth in real terms as a massive test with 9 million people. And it's the other horrible myth that we don't think, because it's horrible to say them out loud. But this idea that poor people are stupid. Yeah. If you live in a constant state of stress, where cortisol, the drug that's supposed to help you deal with stress, is constantly in your system, or at least residual in your system, that has a knock-on effect of not only psychological effects, but physical changes. It invokes your fight or flight response. Your fingernails stop growing, and your hair stops growing. Your immune system shuts down, because if you're in fight or flight, you're in a position where non-essential systems are disregarded. You become more prone to threat perception, which means that people around you can be perceived differently to how they might be coming across. Your neighbour accidentally cutting off that bit of the hedge might not have been an attack on your entire family. It could have been a mistake. But if you live in a constant state of stress, that's not necessarily how you perceive that situation. And this has a knock-on effect in society, right? Social unrest, crime, conflict, polarisation, division. We see them all the time, and we kind of ask ourselves why they're happening. And as Andy said, we're kind of setting people up to fail. And I'm not suggesting for a second that things are perfect, but it makes perfect sense. If you do this and create these conditions, of course these are the outcomes. Why wouldn't they be? They all tend in that direction, and they all lead all of us, which again we got collectively to experience in the pandemic, where we realised the value in the things that were important, collectively all at once. We realised the failings of the system that we were subjected to, that we would otherwise not have experienced all at once. And we saw it for what it's worth, which is not a lot. There's loads of amazing people in there. It has an incredible legacy, and it has an incredible history, like the NHS. But a lot of that is also mythical. We hold it up in very high regards, as though no one else in the world has it. Loads of people and countries have national health care, and some of it, don't shoot the messenger, is better than our NHS. We just tell ourselves the myth. It's a wonderful thing that can be put on show at the Olympics. But when you're in it, that's not necessarily how it feels. And it's not about not being able to see the wood for the trees. When you're trapped, you can't see the river for the water. It is all pervasive. It is everywhere around you, down to the, pun intended, oxygen you breathe. Okay? It's everything. And you can't escape from that. And when you're stuck worrying about the end of the week or the end of the month and whether there's going to be a next one, or whether you're going to be able to provide for the people that you care about or depend on you, you don't think about the end of the world. It's not because you don't care about the end of the world. It's just because the end of the month is too terrifying for you to even conceive thinking any further than that, which polarizes to not be able to take on the really big problems that we face. But we tell ourselves another myth that underpins all of this, which is that hardship results in determination. Now, if hardship resulted in determination, which I admit is true for a very small, infinitesimally small part of the population. We've heard the stories, rags to riches, destitution to success. But if those situations resulted in determination and success and flourishing, the most expensive schools in the country would not provide young people with opportunities. The most expensive courses in the world would not provide you with new skills and new opportunities and try to reframe your horizons to see further. They would throw you in a hole with half a day's worth of food, and if you got out, you were successful. That's not what they do, because that's not the truth. But the myth that we tell ourselves is that it's the responsibility of the people in those situations to find it within themselves to somehow miraculously become determined to do something. When the rest of us, on whatever scale of privilege we all have, and just by being in this room we have some degree of privilege, are pretty disenfranchised with the world because it's a mess. And we don't feel determined most of the time. We feel overwhelmed, pretty hopeless. We occasionally find it within ourselves to try something. Usually, not because our lives depend on it, because we want to and we choose to, which is amazing. And although there are a few people that results in, it's not the story of success, despite it's the fact it's the story of every entrepreneur you ever see interviewed in every piece of newspaper article or website blog or story ever told on film. That's not how it is. And that means that we're missing out on an incredible opportunity for the whole world, or the country we live in, or the nation, or region we live in, or your locality or community, for people to be enterprising and entrepreneurial, and not just in a capitalist sense, in having the space to think about things outside the things that are just affecting them, that they might want to have an effect on, because they have enough economic security to think that far ahead, or plan that far ahead. And that's true of trying to make change. It's true of some of the things that we've talked about today. We believe this myth that we have to suffer for our art. You know, all that wonderful stuff that gets dismissed of having no value, that you spent 18 months solid binging on in some form or another, and would have literally lost the plot and thrown yourself off something very tall if you could get out of the house to do so. That was art. And that's becoming a pursuit of the elite, let alone the privilege, because the only way you get good at anything is by having the time to spend doing that. And that's if you're fortunate enough to having worked out what that is in the first place. Because most of us, although we have success in some form, don't really know what we want to do with our lives because we haven't even worked that bit out yet, let alone have the time to focus on it and master it. But we believe that as a myth. But without economic security, we can't get that. And when we think about the problems that we need to face, because as far as I'm concerned, basic income needs to just get sorted as quickly as possible, and then the work starts. Like, we need people involved, because it's not the Victorian times. You can't just identify a problem, don a monocle and a top hat and fix it, because nothing exists in isolation anymore. We need lots of people involved, a really diverse cross-section of people involved. I'm not just talking about the country you're from, your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status. I'm talking about diversity of thought, as in how you experience the world, diversity of lived experience, because the best people in the world to fix problems are people that actually know what they're talking about. And the problems we're talking about need lived experience to be fixed. You can't fix them on other people's behalf. Therefore, the only way, I believe, we get to that position is if we have as many people involved as possible. And the only way we can do that is by creating the conditions to do that, because we certainly can't predict how this is going to play out. None of us predicted what happened 2 and a bit years ago. And unfortunately, that was the cocktail sausage before dinner when it comes to the climate crisis. And we can't wait for that to hit to then try and react to it. We need to be creating those conditions now. And we need to facilitate as many people as possible being able to get involved now. But in order to do that, yes, we need to identify the problems. But I think we also need to dig a little bit deeper than that. And we need the headspace to do that. And we need to start thinking about the myths that we tell ourselves without really thinking about them. And it's fine to reach the conclusion, having consciously thought about it, that's the same as what you believed about before you'd explored it. But without questioning those things that will actually underpin everything we're trying to do, to put different people on a trajectory of young people can do this, that, and the other, if maybe that's a story that wasn't true in the first place. So we shouldn't set them down that path. And that's where we need to start. And that's why coming together and sharing these experiences and understanding that these things is so important. Because in spite of what we have felt for the last 2 years, and in spite of the way that being trapped behind a screen is isolated, together is still our default thing. And interdependence is still the only way we fix things. We're told independence is the goal, but it's interdependence. And you can only get that by removing the barriers of being constantly stressed or isolated or polarized in communities and around the world, by allowing people to come together when they don't have to worry about so much. So the idea that I want to infect you with is this. I had spent my entire life believing that that thing at the top of the banana was a handle. And it's not. Because when you bend it, it usually does something rubbish to the banana that makes half of it soggy and unedible. And it's not the way that animals who eat bananas actually do it. The way to do it is to pinch it at the top on the little edge bits. And then when you peel it, it actually pulls away all of the bits that you normally spend 5 minutes trying to pick off before eating. And the reason I tell you this, because once you know this, you can't unknow it. And you can choose whether every time you see someone with a banana in their hand, whether you intervene, depending on how well you know them, and quickly make them lose the will to live. You can't know the things that we've been talking about today and choose not to act. Because if we don't do that, we are genuinely absolutely screwed before we even know that. Thank you.
Something inspiring. And I also think the cocktail sauces before dinner might be one of your favourite phrase.
I've borrowed it from someone else, I don't know.
Thank you very much for that. We're going to have a few questions. There was one from earlier that I'm going to throw into the mix as well, that I thought was better suited to this conversation. But just to invite questions, has anybody got a question for Jonny? Yeah, please,
I'm fully convinced of the position that the world would be a better place if everybody had a firm base from which to build their lives, which is basically what we're talking about, isn't it? I noticed that the previous session was from academia to the personal. What I'm putting to you was I need to consider the academic to the collective. And to put bones on that, I will ask you how you see the level of the basic income being determined. How is it decided what it is?
Cool. Well, this is my opinion, not necessarily that of everyone in the network, but I think one of the things that we need to do is initially stop looking at that as a cost. So one of the things, which again is a myth that we believe, is that there's some sort of benchmark that has already been determined. So the amount that the DWP give out, that we argue whether it should be £20 more or less than, is not based on anything. It's just a number. There's no research to back it up. It's just someone picked a number. So the fact that it's even not rounded up to a whole number bothers me as someone who likes numbers. Like, it's not even a measure of anything. So first of all, we always think of it in relationship to that. Then we think of it as being a cost. And the thing that I'm interested in, which is why I believe experiments are so important, is to determine how much that should be. We need to try out different amounts. Because if you buy a £12 power drill, it will do you 3 holes before it breaks. But if you only need to put up a picture, that's all you need it for. But actually, if you want to continue drilling holes and continue and doing stuff, you buy the more expensive one. Now, there may be a silly priced one that's really expensive that's used by a contractor, but it's only by reviewing those 3 that you know the difference between them and whether the amount that they cost has that value or not. And that's what I think we need to determine. We need to determine what we want to invest for what set of impacts and outcomes, and what value there is in investing. Because if you give someone £400 a month, that will give them the means to do one set of things. What is it, 600 or 800 or 1,000? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think anyone does, because you need those amounts over a sustained period of time to give yourself the opportunity to adjust to it and then see what impacts that would have. And depending on the outputs and impacts of those, we can determine the value of making that investment. But I don't think anyone could determine a number based on any of the existing information, because we've no idea what people would do. Which is probably not the answer you were looking for.
Well, no, it isn't, if I'm allowed to come back.
Yeah, please.
Well, just to put the figures on it, just for example, suppose it was set at £5,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
5,000 a year to somebody who is on the red line is a massive improvement in their basic position.
Potentially.
To somebody who is on 100,000 or 50,000 a year now, it's peanuts.
Sure.
So if we're talking about the basic income, is it the same amount for everybody? Or are we going to try and finesse that? We live in an unequal society at the moment. How do we get to one where the basic income would be fair for everybody?
Well, you use a very important word there, which is fairness. And I think, again, one of the pushbacks that comes against basic income is the idea that, well, if everybody gets it, it's being wasted. Well, fairness has also resulted in us having a fair tax system. So actually, the person on £100,000 a year, it would go into their bank account and back out again, plus some more money going back in, because actually they would be a net contributor to the system. It's just that if they lost their money overnight and they got to the end of the month, that money would be there for them. And the analogy I take for that is, if you crash a Fiat or a Ferrari on the motorway, the fire service still come up to cut you out. It's not just because you've got a more expensive car, you don't need it. And it's the same as our universal basic healthcare system. It's the same as our universal basic education system. We give people at least a base level shot. So what that amount is, again, I can't answer you that question, and I don't believe anybody can, because £5,000, regardless of your position, might be a significant amount in relation to what you currently, it's a significant amount in relationship to what you actually need to get yourself out of that position of destitution, out of that position of stress and worry, and actually start contributing.
No, but I can understand what you say. That at some point, it's very discriminating.
Absolutely.
What the basic
Sure.
income is.
And I'm happy to tell you that number once someone's done a test with some different amounts, and I've seen the effects of it. I'm not an economist, but I'll still give you an opinion about why I think it should be. Yeah,
About £10,000 a year,
sure.
because we know that stops people being super stressed and bored. So basically, I'm going to be a centre to both of you. Like the figure, there are real figures that are in the real world now. You can look at what it takes for pensioners to be healthy and well. It's not so much looking to the future. You can look at what's happened. You can look at evidence. That figure that Matthew gave earlier corresponds to data that's been around for several decades, that actually people's level of happiness doesn't improve, apart from in America, once you get about $10,000 a year. And there's a lot of data on this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that there is a political aspect of this, which is fighting about, I want it more, I want it less. But there is real data, right? It's not like anybody's making this up.
No, I'm raising the data, I only use the figures as an illustration. The question is, who decides? In other words, it becomes, as you rightly say, a political question.
Could I just say something? I think it's much more important that we decide how much it goes up every year or down. But it's something that's constant, rather than being buying or a living power, rather than a figure. Because I would say that perhaps it was 10,000 this morning, but now they've announced that the heating is going to go up by 3,000 a year for the average family. It shouldn't be 10,000 this afternoon. It should be something different. And so you need something that's much more flexible. We've got into the problem of fixed sums And that's why we're in the shit we're in at the moment.
I think we could arrange a whole conference, couldn't we, on what the rate should be and how it should be set.
We're doing game show format.
Yeah. So there's a note for you, Patrick, there's an area of conversation that we want to expand.
We still haven't answered my question. Who decides?
We all do. We have to do it independently. We have to do it through research methods. We have to do it through testing it with lots of people of different lived experiences and trying to get them up to saturation model tests. So we're looking at the impacts on the community, not just the individual or the household.
Who's doing that?
Well, I'm involved in doing it. Some of the people in this room.
Achieve the ideal situation and the UBI is accepted it.
Yep.
Who does it then? Who does make these adjustments? Who does decide?
I would imagine it will play out in the way that most policy situations play out or governance situations, but what form that will take by the point we get there.
I don't mean whether it's done through which government departments, which decision makers, who are the decision makers?
Sorry, I'm gonna pause this conversation because I think you've got a wonderful question that I'm not sure we're going to resolve it, but please keep talking.
People,
Yeah.
somebody else is going to come up with X and you need an answer.
Well, the Local Pay Commission at the minute sets minimum wage, for example, that's, looked at and definitely updated. So I would think it would be a third party body like the Local Pay Commission who would think about whether the UBI needs to be updated in line with, for example, the cost of living on the CPI.
A transparent and open organisation, which everybody gets to see what's happening and why those decisions are being made and who's been involved.
Who controls that commission?
This is probably an excellent segue into my next question, which is if you do want to continue this conversation, stay involved in the conversation around universal basic income, and if you want to be some way connected to the decision making, the activists, what can people do from today? If you're inspired, if you're connected, you've got brilliant questions, you've got brilliant thoughts, what can you do?
Well, I suppose at the most basic level is get involved somehow. And we try to focus on making it about the things that matter to people. So we're not going for the macro policy change and learning a load of glossary terms. We want people to engage at the level that they're interested in. And ourselves and basically good conversation. We are co-secretariat for what's called the CPPLG, which is cross-parliamentary and local governance group that's first of its kind looking at UBI. So if you're an elected representative, that's a route into you getting involved, and that involves briefing sessions. So you can go into the forums in which you might have agency or some degree of influence in and make those points or bring up those questions. But hopefully the work that we do jointly and other organisations do are accessible in all sorts of means. So we have quite a few local labs in the UK. We have some international labs if you're visiting from another country or know people outside. And we also have some non-geographic labs, so some thematic labs, as was mentioned at the start of the day. We have a youth lab, a women's lab, an arts lab, an LGBTQ plus lab, a disability lab and a food lab. We've got a couple more in the pipeline. So if your lived experience that you are connected to others is more significant because the impact it has on that lived experience rather than where you were born or the postcode you live in, then there's other routes for you to join. Or if you want to, you can just join as an individual and engage with kind of, I like doing this, could we come up with a project?
And so that's the Universal Basic Income Lab Network that has all these different things that you can connect into. What's the first step? What do you do to how do you step into it?
Reach in your pocket by the internet, I would imagine, is probably the most
There's a join up, sign up to make.
Yeah, there's a mailing list. There is presences on social media platforms for the network and obviously a lot of the labs. So again, hopefully there is lots of ways to engage that are easy. And as the pandemic is allegedly subsiding, we are trying to get back to doing in-person events as well. But as we have done today, trying to make them accessible from people that can't make it as well.
Super, thank you so much. Yeah, I don't think we told you, but we've been live streaming today, which is fantastic. Okay, any further questions for Jonny?
Andy Thomas, I'm a conscious leadership consultant. One voice you've not heard from today is the business community. On what can we do to actually engage that stakeholder, which can be massive in terms of
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something that we've been talking about. So the original lab was founded in Sheffield, and we've literally just done our first in-person event for over 2 years on Tuesday. And one of the things that we've been talking about for a while is how do we engage local businesses? Is there mechanisms based on some of the work that has been done within the movement and also within the network around sort of bringing people together to kind of sign something? Not that that in itself is the action, but that is kind of brings people together and starts that conversation. And could we do some sort of open letter where we are getting businesses to support that, so that it is kind of dealing with some of the situations that they face, like, I don't know, having customers. So there's no reason why they shouldn't be supportive of that. So I think there's examples like that, and probably many others that we could talk about or come up with. But I think the more voices and collective voices that are representatives of communities and groups and bodies of people are really important.
I also think with the great recognition, there's an opportunity to make large corporates who could actually get in the way of building and I don't think we're part of the discussion going on like that.
Okay,
Do you have an idea of how to?
Well, we have to have
sounds great.
We, I'm on the facing conversations, so we actually have a toolkit for exactly this, helping people start conversations with communities that they're embedded in, because you're best place to have that conversation with people that you know and the communities that you know. And in fact, you know, last time we even tried to do that, you could put conversations through. Yeah, we have to, I think there's a QR code in the past that help you access that. Yeah, and again, that's what we can support. And in the UBI Lab Network as well. There's a moment where you start UBI Lab support work. I think that's really useful. This is the kind of
Perfect. So if you didn't hear that and you want to do a conversation, you want to have a conversation that connects in with your networks and your collaborators, basic income conversation in your packs, there's a QR code that can lead you to a toolkit. Wonderful, thank you. Do you have any last comments before we wrap up?
No, not really. I think a lot of what the ideas behind this stuff and showing how kind of collectively and cross-party and beyond the boundaries and the polarization and the ideologies this is becoming, because it is such a necessity, is so important. But it's not necessarily going to be done by the people that currently hold the path. And as of the famous Margaret Mead quote that we're always a big fan of at Opus, is that never underestimate a small group of people being able to change the world. Indeed, is the only thing that ever happens.
Beautiful, thank you very much. We've thrown sort of thousands and thousands of reasons at you, and I'm sure you are already kind of keen on universal basic income, I'm sure. So hopefully there's loads to go and mull over and think about and digest from today, and think about how you're going to put those into actions and stay connected. I'd like to invite now Patrick Hurley from the RSA. He's the North of England manager for the Royal Society of Arts. He's going to wrap up today and just send you on your way with some action points of thinking about what's next steps. Patrick? Well, welcome.
Thanks, Ed. Is this gone up? Just swap it. Yeah, the battery's gone up. Take this one.
Have I been talking to myself for the last?
I think everybody's been fantastic. Waiting till the end of the day. The microphone didn't quite make it, so apologies there. Thanks for coming today. I'm going to keep you a couple of minutes because I understand and appreciate you've been here for a good few hours. I am Patrick Hurley. I'm the North of England manager for the RSA. We're really pleased that we've been able to bring you this event today in collaboration with UBI Lab Network and the Basic Income Conversation. I've just got a few notices to say, a few thank yous, and I want to leave you with some actions to take away, because we've all been to events and conferences where you have a great time and you meet some new people and you think, I'm really going to get behind that, and then within 2 or 3 days there's no action points that you ever take away from it. You just think, well, that was a good day. I hope that today isn't going to be that sort of thing. So firstly, a few thanks to our speakers. I'm not going to list everybody who's been on our agenda, you'll be pleased to know, but I will say specific thanks to both Natalie Bennett and to Andy Byrne. I'm sure you'll agree that they were both really inspirational speakers. Hope you got a lot from them. And I especially want to thank Andy McLaughlin for a lovely musical interlude over lunch. We thought we'd do something a little bit different, and I hope that it worked. I certainly enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Thanks to the venue, the Friends Meeting House here for hosting us today. Thanks also to our partners and the stallholders at the back of the hall. So that's the UBI Lab Network, the Trussell Trust, the People's Powerhouse, Brighter Sound, and the GM Poverty Action. And thanks also to our host, Beth Power, for making sure Thank you so much, Beth, because I understand that things at the last minute crop up and you have to fail, and you did it perfectly. I want to talk you through the attendee pack that hopefully you should all have. There are a few spare outside in the foyer if you have not one, if you'd like to take one with you. There are some QR codes, as have been mentioned. The first one I'll point you to is this, which is report, Anthony Rafferty's report, feasibility study on the case for the Greater Manchester pilot. If you scan the code on that sheet, it'll take you to a copy of his report. Please do take a look and see if you agree with his findings that there's a case to be made for a Greater Manchester pilot. Also, this leaflet will take you to the report that the RSA has been involved in working on, that's been co-authored by Matthew Johnson, one of our speakers earlier. You will notice as well that there are some top trumps cards in the packs. These have been kindly provided by Toby, who's one of our speakers on the panel this afternoon. And they go into detail about some of the trials and the pilots that have already taken place across the world. So you'll see in the packs that we've got examples from Canada, from the US, from Finland, and there is one which is still to be completed, which is the Wales Care Leavers pilot, which is currently being undertaken just a few miles from here. We've also included a couple more resources, which I'll point out here. First off is this one from the UBI Lab Network, kindly designed by Jonny and sent across to me on Monday for printing, which we honestly had done. The resources in this, on this, this QR code point to, include things like templated letters to local politicians, to MPs, and to people who are in positions of authority and positions of decision-making capacity. They include things like templated council motions. If you are a local authority politician yourself or a candidate for office, see whether or not somebody in your local area can put a motion of this sort forward to their town hall in support of universal basic income. You may have seen from my accent that I'm from Liverpool, and back in 2018, Liverpool City Council was, I think it was the first council in the country that passed a motion in support of UBI. There's been many since, so if you are able, please do lobby your local councillors and politicians for that. The other resources, basic income conversation, which Claire over there mentioned earlier. If you scan that code, that will take you to the resource page from basic income conversation, and that will allow you then to be much more informed when you're having those conversations with people about UBI. On a more personal level, if you'd like to know more or get involved and you're not quite sure how to, if Jonny's invitation to look on the internet isn't quite enough for you, in your packs is also my business card with my phone number on there. Feel free anytime, just give me a call, and if it's not me that can answer your question, I will know the person who can, and I will signpost you up to the right person. So please don't feel that you shouldn't bother me. Give me a call anytime at all if you want to know more, and if I can't answer your question, I'll know someone who can. And with that, I'd just like to thank you all again for coming. You've been a great audience. You've been fantastic. It's been a fairly long day. I appreciate, and thanks very much for sticking to the end. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it interesting and inspirational. And I hope you can be inspired, if you've been persuaded, to go back to your localities and to do your bit to bring about a universal basic income in the future. So thanks again, and with that, I'll pass back to Beth to finish up with the lecture.
Oh, that's better. I can even hear myself now. Sorry about that. It's been a great day, and a massive thanks, just to add on to Patrick, massive thanks to you all for coming, and thank you so much to Patrick and colleagues for organising along with the partners today. So thank you, Patrick. That's it, really. Please. Everyone's probably going to need a drink now. Please take care, enjoy your journeys home. Thank you so much for coming. Stay involved, stay connected, and I'm sure see you at future Universal Basic Income events. Thank you very much.